I recently embarked on Viking's River of Gold riverboat cruise along the Douro River in Portugal. This was my first experience on a riverboat. My goal for this video is to give you a quick overview without too many details, but feel free to ask questions in the comments section. This Part 1 video will cover days 1 through 5. Look for Part 2 for days 6 through 10. I have left chapter marks if you want to skip forward or back. I used Viking's booking process for flights on this trip and let them handle everything. It was an overnight flight, so I arrived at 3 p.m. the following day. The custom process was easy in Lisbon. After I had my passport checked and gathered my luggage, I met Viking personnel in the waiting area. We were then ushered to some passenger vans, which took us to the Corinthia Hotel. The hotel was not that impressive on approach, but once inside, it was really quite gorgeous. I particularly enjoyed the area out back that had 2 fabulous restaurants and this lovely grassy area for lounging. The Soul Cafe had some wonderful food and great atmosphere. The hotel room was very comfortable with many amenities. A few hours after arrival, there was a welcome meeting at the hotel. We were greeted with celebratory wine and juice drinks and ushered into a room where we met some of the Viking staff and Lisbon tour guides. The next morning, we ate a buffet breakfast at the hotel, which had excellent food. Then we boarded a motor coach for a tour of Lisbon. Driving through the streets of Lisbon is quite inspiring. The buildings are generally beautiful, with diverse and colorful architecture. At first, we went to visit Lisbon Tower, which is a UNESCO heritage site. It was once a prison and built in 1514. The tower sits by the Tagus River, and the entire area is quite picturesque. We then headed to the Maritime Museum, which occupies the west part of a monastery. The entire building is architecturally magnificent, with so much embellishment of the facade. The most interesting part of the museum for me was the ship models that were amazingly detailed. We were directed next to walk to an historic patisserie from 1837. The Belém patisserie is famous for their Portuguese custard tarts. Across from the museum, there was also an enchanting park. Here's me having fun with the fountain. Then we got back on the bus and went to Eduardo VII Park, which is a site where the Pope would be addressing crowds in a couple weeks. The vantage point from the top of the hill was very striking. I can just imagine all the people there to listen to the Pope. We were then taken back to the hotel. I could have seen more of Lisbon that night, but instead I opted to visit the town of Sintra, which is just north of Lisbon. I had heard it was lovely and wanted to check it out. I will post a separate video on Sintra if you are interested. The next day, we had to have our luggage outside our hotel room door by 6:45 a.m. We ate breakfast again at the hotel and then boarded the bus at 8:15. We traveled north towards Porto, but stopped in the city of Coimbra. At first, we stopped for an hour in an area with gorgeous cobblestone streets, beautiful architecture, and tons of shops. There were numerous pastry shops that had these gigantic meringues, so it must have been a thing there. Then we got back on the bus and headed for another UNESCO heritage site, Coimbra University. The university sits on expansive grounds which offer magnificent views of the valley below. The university also houses a Beauty and the Beast type of library. You weren't allowed to take pictures inside the library, so I bought a postcard of it. This picture doesn't do justice to it, as it was marvelous to behold. There was also a gorgeous chapel which showed impressive displays of Portuguese tiles. We boarded the bus again and were taken to a restaurant for a Portuguese lunch that included entertainment by some local musicians and a singer. They were quite talented. We then had one final bus trip to get to the boat in Porto. I covered the embarkation process in Riverboat in another video, so look for the Viking hemming in my playlist. I'll say here that the embarkation process was seamless and the boat and staff were exceptional. Throughout the cruise, they offer informational sessions on Portugal and the various excursion sites. It's usually before or after dinner. The boat took off the next morning and moved through locks, of which there are several along the route. The locks are quite fascinating. It was fun to sit out on the deck as you went through them to observe the navigation. The boats have been designed to be as wide as the locks will allow, so we were only about a foot from the wall on both sides. We eventually docked and went on an excursion to Mateus Palace and Gardens. The palace itself is just amazing architecture, really stunningly beautiful. What I liked best about the museum were the various furniture pieces, very ornate and intricately carved antiques. And then the gardens themselves surround the palace, and it was fun to kind of walk through them and explore. We then traveled into wine country to the Sandeman Winery for a tour and port tasting. The setting was divine, up high, overlooking the river and vineyards. Throughout the days on the river, there were times to just relax and enjoy the scenery through the Douro Valley. Here are some images from the river. Please look for the Part 2 video for the rest of the cruise, and I will also post additional videos on some of the cities and sites along the way. And if you'd like to follow more of my senior and solo travel journeys, please click the subscribe button below. Cheers!